Jake Martinez wiped the sweat from his forehead as he watched the mining drill pull another load of precious metals from the ground. New Haven Colony had been his home for 3 years now, and he loved everything about this place. The red desert, stretched for miles in every direction under 2 purple suns. His crew of 12 men worked hard every day to pull rare minerals from deep underground. They were simple people who just wanted to make an honest living on the frontier. Everything changed the day the Catherians arrived. Jake first saw their black ships landing near the colony center like giant insects made of metal. The ships were twice the size of anything humans built, and they made no noise when they moved. Within an hour, Commander Zexitar and his soldiers marched through the dusty streets. The aliens stood 8 feet tall with dark shell-like skin covering their entire bodies. Each one had 4 arms and moved with the grace of born killers. Their faces looked almost human, except for the sharp teeth and yellow eyes that seemed to burn with inner fire. Jake had heard stories about these creatures from traders who visited other colonies. The Catherian Empire controlled hundreds of worlds across this part of the galaxy. They believed they were superior to every other race and treated everyone else like animals. Most colonies that resisted them were destroyed within days. Commander Zextar set up his headquarters in the colony administration building. Within hours, new rules were posted on every street corner. All mining operations would now be supervised by Catherian overseers. Half of everything they dug up would go directly to the Empire as taxes. Any human who disobeyed orders would be sent to work camps on distant planets. Jake read the notices with growing anger. These aliens had no right to come here and steal what his people had worked so hard to build. New Haven was an independent colony that had never bothered anyone. They traded fairly with passing ships and minded their own business. Now these creatures wanted to turn them into slaves. The worst part was how Zextar looked at Lisa Parker. Jake had been dating Lisa for 2 years and planned to ask her to marry him soon. She worked as a teacher in the colony school, and everyone loved her gentle nature and bright smile. But when the alien commander saw her walking to work that first morning, his yellow eyes followed her every step. Jake noticed how the creature's mandibles clicked together in what looked like hunger. 3 days after the Catherians arrived, Jake decided he had seen enough. His crew was loading ore into transport containers when 2 alien soldiers arrived at the mining site. They wore no names or ranks, but their weapons made it clear they were in charge now. The taller one pointed at the containers with one of his 4 arms. "This load goes to Imperial transport ship," the soldier said in broken human speech. "You will receive 20% as payment." 20%? Jake stepped forward. "That ore is worth enough to feed this colony for a month. We need at least 60% to survive." The alien soldier made a sound like grinding metal that Jake realized was laughter. "Humans do not negotiate with superiors. You take 20% and be grateful we let you live." Jake felt his hands form fists, but he knew starting a fight would get his men killed. The aliens carried energy weapons that could cut through steel. Even worse, he could see more Catherian soldiers watching from nearby buildings. Any violence would bring dozens of them down on the mining crew. "Fine," Jake said through gritted teeth. 20%. But the humiliation was just beginning. That afternoon, Jake walked into the colony center to buy supplies and found Commander Zextar talking to Lisa outside the school. The alien towered over her small frame, but she seemed more curious than afraid. Jake had always admired how brave Lisa could be, even in dangerous situations. "Your species fascinates me," Zextar was saying in perfect human speech. "Most creatures we conquer show only fear, but humans display such interesting emotions." "We're not conquered," Lisa replied calmly. "We're just trying to coexist peacefully." The commander's mandibles clicked again. "Peace is what the strong grant to the weak. Your Jake Martinez believes he can protect you, but he is just another inferior human. When he realizes this truth, you will need a more suitable protector." Jake stepped forward before he could stop himself. Lisa doesn't need protection from anyone, especially not from you. Zextar turned to face him, and Jake felt like a child looking up at a giant. The alien's 4 arms hung loose at his sides, but Jake could see how quickly those hands could move to grab weapons. The commander's yellow eyes studied Jake like he was examining an interesting insect. "The mining foreman speaks," Zextar said, with amusement. "Tell me, human, do you truly believe you could challenge a Catherian warrior?" "I believe I could challenge anyone who threatens my people." The words came out before Jake could think about them. Around the square, other colonists stopped what they were doing to watch. Even the Catherian soldiers seemed surprised by what they had just heard. Lisa grabbed Jake's arm, but he gently moved her hand away. Commander Zextar stood completely still for almost a full minute. When he finally spoke, his voice carried across the entire square. "By the ancient laws of combat, I accept your challenge, Jake Martinez. Tomorrow at noon, we fight in single combat. If you win, your people keep their independence. If I win, this colony becomes a Catherian protectorate, and your female becomes my property." Jake felt his blood turn cold, but he nodded. "I accept." As the alien commander walked away, Jake realized what he had just done. He had challenged a creature that could probably tear him apart with 2 hands tied behind its back, but he also knew he had no choice. Sometimes a man had to stand up even when he knew he might lose everything. The night before the fight, Jake could not sleep. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring out the window at the alien ships that blocked out the stars. Lisa had tried to convince him to run away with her, but he knew there was nowhere to go. The Catherians would hunt them down and make examples of them both. Instead, Jake spent the dark hours reading everything he could find about Catherian biology and fighting techniques. The colony database had reports from other worlds that had encountered these creatures. Most of the information was not encouraging. Catherians were 3 times stronger than humans and twice as fast. Their shell-like skin could stop most small weapons, and their 4 arms gave them advantages no human fighter could match. But Jake found something interesting in a report from the Tau Ceti colonies. A human scientist had studied Catherian anatomy and noted that their powerful bodies came with a cost. The thick armor plates and extra muscle mass meant they used energy very quickly during physical activity. Most Catherian battles lasted only minutes because longer fights exhausted the warriors completely. Jake had one advantage that no other species seemed to possess. Humans were endurance hunters who had evolved to chase prey across vast distances. While Catherians were built for quick, decisive victories, humans could keep going when everything else collapsed from exhaustion. Morning came too quickly. Jake ate a small breakfast and tried not to think about whether it would be his last meal. Lisa kissed him goodbye with tears in her eyes, but she did not try to stop him again. She understood that some fights had to be fought, even when winning seemed impossible. The entire colony gathered in the main square at noon. Humans stood on one side while Catherian soldiers filled the opposite area. Commander Zextar waited in the center, wearing only his natural armor with no weapons or additional protection. Jake approached wearing simple work clothes and boots. That would give him good grip on the sandy ground. "You still have time to withdraw your challenge," Zextar said as Jake stopped 10 feet away. "I take no pleasure in killing brave fools." "I'm not withdrawing anything," Jake replied. The alien commander made that grinding metal sound that passed for laughter among his people. "Then let us begin this brief entertainment." Zextar moved faster than Jake thought possible. One moment, the creature was standing casually 10 feet away, and the next second a fist the size of a dinner plate slammed into Jake's ribs. The human flew backward and hit the ground hard enough to leave a crater in the packed dirt. Pain exploded through his chest and he tasted blood in his mouth. Jake rolled aside just as another fist smashed the ground where his head had been. He scrambled to his feet, but Zextar was already moving again. 2 more punches caught Jake in. the stomach and shoulders spinning him around like a child's toy. The crowd of humans gasped as their champion staggered and fell to one knee. "Stay down, human," Zexatar commanded. "I have proven my superiority." But Jake pushed himself back to his feet. Blood ran down his face from a cut above his eye, but he raised his fists again. The alien seemed genuinely surprised that the human was still conscious, let alone ready to continue fighting. For the next 20 minutes, Zextar systematically beat Jake to the ground. Every time the human fell, the alien expected him to stay down. Every time Jake got back up bloody and defiant. The Cytherian soldiers began to mutter among themselves as they watched their commander repeatedly defeat the same opponent who refused to acknowledge defeat. Jake knew he was losing badly, but he also noticed something important. Zextar's movements were getting slightly slower. The alien's breathing was becoming heavier. Those powerful muscles that had seemed so unstoppable were starting to burn through their energy reserves. After an hour of brutal punishment, Jake finally saw his chance. Zextar threw a haymaker punch that would have ended the fight, but the alien was now moving just slowly enough for Jake to duck under the blow. As the commander stumbled forward off balance, Jake drove his knee up into the joint where Zextar's leg armor connected to his hip plates. The alien roared in pain and surprise. No one had ever managed to hurt him in hand-to-hand combat before. Jake followed up with quick strikes to other weak points he had memorized from the anatomy reports. The spots where armor plates met were vulnerable to precise attacks, even from someone much weaker. Now the real fight began. Zextar was no longer toying with an inferior opponent. He was facing someone who had studied his weaknesses and refused to give up no matter how much punishment he absorbed. But the alien was also discovering what every persistence hunter knew. Endurance was not just about lasting longer than your prey. It was about wearing down opponents until their strength became a weakness. By the second hour, Zextar was visibly struggling. His forearms hung heavier at his sides, and his precise strikes had become wild swings. Jake was bleeding from dozens of cuts and probably had several broken ribs, but he could see victory becoming possible for the first time. The human started using everything around him as a weapon. He threw sand in Zexatar's eyes, then grabbed a loose stone to smash against the alien's knee joint. When the commander grabbed him, Jake bit down on the creature's wrist until dark blood flowed between the armor plates. "You fight without honor." Zextar gasped as they separated again. "I fight to win," Jake replied. 3 hours after the fight began, Commander Zextar collapsed. The proud alien warrior who had seemed invincible at the start of the battle now lay face down in the dirt, unable to rise. His powerful body had finally burned through all its energy reserves, and his thick armor had become too heavy to carry. Jake stood over his defeated opponent, swaying on his feet but still conscious. Around the square, both humans and Cytherians stared in shocked silence. No one had ever seen anything like this before. "I yield," Zextar whispered from the ground. The impossible had happened. A human had defeated a Cytherian warrior in single combat. Jake spent 3 days in the medical center recovering from his injuries. Lisa hardly left his side as the colony doctor worked to repair his broken ribs and treat the countless cuts and bruises that covered his body. Every human on New Haven wanted to visit their champion, but Jake was too exhausted to see most of them. He had pushed his body beyond all limits and needed time to heal. Meanwhile, something unprecedented was happening in the Cytherian camp. Commander Zextar had been stripped of his rank and weapons according to ancient warrior laws. When a Cytherian lost single combat to an enemy, they became that enemy's property until the debt of honor could be repaid through faithful service. The other alien soldiers treated their former leader like he no longer existed. On Jake's 4th day in medical care, Zextar appeared in the doorway. The once proud warrior now wore simple clothes instead of military armor. His 4 arms hung at his sides in a posture that Jake had learned meant shame among his people. Lisa moved protectively closer to Jake's bed, but the alien made no threatening gestures. "I have come to fulfill my obligation," Zextar said in a voice barely above a whisper. "Cytherian law states that I must serve the one who defeated me until my honor is restored." Jake studied the creature that had nearly killed him just days before. Without his armor and weapons, Zextar looked smaller somehow. The arrogance and cruelty that had made him so frightening were gone. In their place, Jake saw something he had never expected to find in a Cytherian warrior. He saw uncertainty and even fear. "I don't want a slave," Jake said carefully. "I just wanted you to leave my people alone." "The law cannot be changed," Zextar replied. "If you do not accept my service, I must take my own life to preserve what little honor remains." Lisa gasped at this revelation, but Jake was not entirely surprised. He had read enough about Cytherian culture to know how seriously they took matters of honor and duty. Rejecting Zextar's service would essentially be murder even if Jake never touched the alien. "Fine," Jake said finally. "You can serve me, but you'll live among humans and follow human rules. No killing, no threatening anyone. You help with whatever work needs doing, and you treat everyone with respect." Zextar bowed his head in acceptance. "I understand." Over the following weeks, the former Cytherian commander became a strange sight around New Haven colony. He worked in the mining operation, using his great strength to move equipment that required teams of humans to lift. He helped repair buildings damaged by the desert storms. He even assisted in the colony school where Lisa taught children about different worlds and cultures. The other Cytherian soldiers remained at their base, but they no longer interfered with human activities. Word had spread throughout their ranks that their species could be defeated in combat. Some of the aliens seemed angry about this discovery, but others appeared curious about the humans who had accomplished the impossible. Jake found himself spending time with Zextar almost every day. At first, it was simply to give the alien tasks to complete, but gradually their relationship became more complex. Zextar asked questions about human customs and behavior that surprised Jake with their thoughtfulness. The warrior who had once dismissed humans as inferior animals was trying to understand what made them different from other species he had conquered. "Your people confuse me," Zextar admitted one evening as they watched the twin suns set over the desert. "Cytherians value strength above all else, but humans seem to find strength in weakness. You care for the sick and elderly who cannot contribute to survival. You risk your lives to save others even when logic says they should be abandoned. We call it compassion," Jake explained. "Taking care of each other makes us all stronger." "This, compassion," Zextar said slowly, as if testing an unfamiliar word. "Is this why you fought me? Not for personal glory, but to protect others?" Jake nodded. "I couldn't let you hurt my people." The alien was quiet for a long moment. "I have conquered 17 worlds for the Empire. On each one I told myself that might makes right and the strong should rule the weak. But watching your people these past weeks, I begin to wonder if strength means something different than I believed." The real test of Zextar's changing nature came during the mining accident. A support beam failed in Tunnel 7, trapping 4 workers under tons of rock and sand. Jake immediately organized rescue efforts, but the situation looked hopeless. The tunnel was too unstable to use heavy equipment, and digging by hand would take days the trapped men did not have. Without being asked, Zextar volunteered to crawl into the dangerous space. His armor-like skin could protect him from falling. Debris better than any human equipment. For 6 hours, he worked alone in the darkness, using his 4 arms to move rocks that would have been impossible for humans to shift. When the tunnel threatened to collapse completely, he used his own body to brace the ceiling, while Jake pulled the injured miners to safety. The last man out was Bill Davis, who had broken both legs and could not move on his own. As Jake dragged Bill toward the tunnel entrance, a section of the ceiling gave way. Zextar threw himself forward to shield both humans from the falling rocks. When the dust settled, The alien was unconscious and bleeding from a deep cut on his head. Lisa was the first to reach them as they emerged from the tunnel. She immediately began treating Zextar's injuries, while Jake made sure Bill got to the medical center. Later that night, as the alien recovered from his wounds, Jake sat beside his bed just as Lisa had done for him after the fight. "Why did you risk your life for my people?" Jake asked. Zextar opened his yellow eyes and looked directly at him. "Because they are not just your people anymore. They are mine as well." It was then that Jake realized something important had changed. The alien warrior, who had come to conquer them, had somehow become part of their community. And watching Lisa care for their former enemy with the same gentleness she showed everyone else, Jake understood that she had begun to see the change, too. The peaceful days on New Haven ended when Admiral Kreshavon arrived with a war fleet of 20 ships. Jake watched from the colony observation tower as the massive vessels descended from orbit like metal storm clouds blocking out both suns. Each ship was 10 times larger than anything in the original Catherian force and bristled with enough weapons to turn the entire planet into glass. Admiral Kreshavon had been Zextar's mentor in the Catherian Military Academy. He was an old warrior who had conquered more worlds than any other commander in the Empire's history. The news that his former student had been defeated by a primitive human had enraged him beyond all reason. He came to New Haven not just to restore order, but to make an example that would terrify every species under Catherian rule. The Admiral's shuttle landed in the colony square with a roar of engines that shattered windows in nearby buildings. Kreshavon emerged wearing ornate battle armor covered in the skulls of enemies he had killed personally. Unlike Zextar's relatively simple appearance, this alien was clearly a creature of nightmares. Scars covered every inch of his visible skin, and his yellow eyes burned with the fires of 1,000 battles. Behind the Admiral came a full company of elite Catherian shock troops. These were not the standard soldiers who had accompanied Zextar, but specialists trained for planetary conquest. Their weapons could level city blocks, and their armor was thick enough to stop anything humans might use against them. "Bring me the human who defeated Commander Zextar," Kreshavon announced in a voice that carried across the entire colony. "And bring me the traitor who brought shame to our species." Jake walked out to meet the Admiral with Zextar beside him. The former commander had insisted on facing his old mentor despite Jake's arguments that it would only make things worse. Lisa and most of the colony council followed them but stayed back far enough to avoid being targeted by the alien weapons. Admiral Kreshavon studied Jake like a scientist examining an unusual specimen. After a full minute of silence, he made that grinding metal sound that passed for laughter among his people. "This is the great human warrior who accomplished the impossible," the Admiral said with obvious contempt. "He looks like every other weak creature we have enslaved across the galaxy." "Appearances can be deceiving," Zextar said quietly. The Admiral's attention snapped to his former student. "You dare speak in the presence of your betters, traitor? You who brought dishonor to everything our species represents?" "I learned something here that our species never taught me," Zextar replied. "I learned the difference between strength and brutality." Kreshavon struck without warning. His armored fist caught Zextar in the chest and sent the younger alien flying backward to crash against a nearby building. Before Jake could react, 2 shock troopers grabbed his arms and forced him to his knees in the sand. "Execute them both," the Admiral commanded. "Then burn this colony to the ground as an example to any other species that might consider resistance." But as the shock troopers raised their weapons, something unexpected happened. The ground began to shake with the sound of approaching engines. Jake looked up to see ships descending from all directions, but these were not Catherian vessels. They were the mismatched craft of independent traders, smugglers, and rebels from dozens of different worlds. Captain Rita Stone landed her converted mining ship directly in front of the Catherian formation. Jake recognized her from the trading runs she made to New Haven every few months. Behind her came ships from the Centauri Free Colonies, the Vegan Republic, and even some vessels Jake did not recognize at all. "This is Captain Stone of the Independent Alliance," Rita announced over her ship's communications system. "We're here to provide assistance to New Haven Colony." Admiral Kreshavon seemed genuinely surprised by this development. "The Catherian Empire has no quarrel with you, Captain. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." "Actually, you do have a quarrel with us," Rita replied as her ship's weapons powered up. "Every species in this sector has heard about what happened here. A human defeated one of your warriors in fair combat, and instead of honoring that victory, you came back with a fleet to commit genocide. That makes you exactly the kind of bully we formed this alliance to fight." More ships continued arriving until the sky was filled with vessels from across the galaxy. Jake realized that news of his victory had spread far beyond New Haven. The impossible defeat of a Catherian warrior had inspired other oppressed peoples to believe that the Empire could be resisted. Admiral Kreshavon found himself facing not just one small human colony, but a coalition of species that had united against Catherian domination. His 20 ships were still formidable, but they were outnumbered 3-1 by enemies who had nothing left to lose. "You cannot defeat the Empire," the Admiral snarled. "We have ruled this galaxy for 1,000 years." "Maybe," Captain Stone admitted, "but we can make it cost you more than you're willing to pay." The battle that followed was unlike anything Jake had ever seen. The sky filled with energy beams and explosions as ships from dozens of worlds fought against the Catherian fleet. The humans of New Haven found themselves at the center of a galactic conflict that had begun with one man's refusal to back down from a fight he could not win. Jake and the other colonists took shelter in the mining tunnels while the battle raged. Overhead, Zextar had been badly injured by his former mentor's attack, but he insisted on helping coordinate the colony's defenses. His knowledge of Catherian tactics proved invaluable as the Alliance ships pressed their attack. The fighting lasted for 6 hours before Admiral Kreshavon finally accepted the inevitable. His fleet was being systematically destroyed by opponents who fought with the desperation of people defending their freedom. Rather than lose everything, he agreed to negotiate a ceasefire. The terms were simple. The Catherian Empire would recognize New Haven as an independent world under Alliance protection. In exchange, the Alliance would allow the surviving Imperial ships to withdraw without further attack. It was not total victory for either side, but it represented something that had never happened before in galactic history. The mighty Catherian Empire had been forced to negotiate with species it considered inferior. As the alien ships prepared to depart, Admiral Kreshavon made one final demand. "The traitor Zextar will return with us to face judgment for his crimes." Jake stepped forward despite his exhaustion from the day's events. "Zextar stays here. He's earned the right to choose his own path." The Admiral's yellow eyes burned with fury, but he was in no position to make demands. His fleet was broken, and his reputation as an invincible conqueror was destroyed. "This is not overhuman. The Empire has a long memory." "So do we," Jake replied. As the Catherian ships disappeared into space, Jake realized that everything had changed. New Haven was no longer just a small mining colony trying to survive on the frontier. It had become a symbol of hope for every species that dreamed of freedom from Imperial rule. 6 months after the battle, Jake stood in his kitchen watching Zextar flip pancakes with the careful precision of a surgeon. The former Catherian commander had thrown himself into learning human customs with the same intensity he had once brought to warfare. Cooking had become one of his favorite activities, partly because it allowed him to use all 4 arms at once, but mainly because he enjoyed taking care of others. "The secret is not to flip them too early," Zextar explained as he added fresh pancakes to the growing stack on the counter. "Humans seem to prefer their breakfast foods light and fluffy rather than dense and nutritious." Jake smiled as he poured coffee for himself and Lisa. The aliens' attempts to understand human preferences had led to some interesting experiments in the kitchen. Last week, Zexatar had tried to improve scrambled eggs by adding protein powder and vitamin supplements. The results had been technically more nutritious, but completely inedible. Lisa emerged from the bedroom wearing one of Jake's old work shirts and stretching lazily in the morning sunlight that streamed through the windows. She had moved in with both of them 3 months ago, when it became clear that their unusual living arrangement was working better than anyone had expected. "Something smells wonderful," she said as she kissed Jake good morning, then surprised everyone by hugging Zextar as well. The alien had learned to enjoy physical affection, even though his people considered it a sign of weakness. "I am attempting to perfect the pancake recipe," Zextar announced proudly. "Jake claims my previous efforts were too thick, but I believe this batch achieves the proper consistency." The three of them sat down to breakfast together just as they did every morning. It had taken time to work out the details of their relationship, but they had found a balance that satisfied everyone involved. Jake and Lisa remained romantically involved, but Zexatar had become much more than just a friend or roommate. He was family in every way that mattered. Outside their window, the colony was bustling with activity. New Haven had grown from 1,200 residents to over 5,000 as beings from across the galaxy arrived seeking the freedom they had heard about. The mining operation had expanded to accommodate dozens of different species working together. The school where Lisa taught now offered classes in 17 languages and covered the customs of 40 different worlds. Captain Rita Stone had established a permanent alliance base on the planet's northern continent. Her ships patrolled the system to ensure that no Imperial forces returned to threaten the colony's independence. More importantly, she coordinated supply runs and communications between the growing network of worlds that had joined the resistance against Catherian domination. Jake had been offered command positions in the Alliance fleet, but he preferred to remain on New Haven, where he felt he could do the most good. His victory over Zextar had made him famous throughout the galaxy, but he was uncomfortable with the attention. He was just a mining foreman who had done what needed to be done to protect his people. "The Tau Ceti delegation arrives this afternoon," Lisa mentioned as she helped herself to more pancakes. "They want to establish a formal trade agreement and discuss joining the Alliance." "I still find it remarkable," Zextar said thoughtfully. 6 months ago, the Catherian Empire controlled this entire sector without question. Now dozens of worlds are declaring independence because one human refused to surrender." Jake shrugged. "I just got lucky." "Luck had nothing to do with it," Zextar replied firmly. "You won because you understood something my people never learned. True strength comes not from the ability to dominate others, but from the willingness to sacrifice for something greater than yourself." A soft chime from the communications console interrupted their conversation. Jake accepted the incoming transmission and Captain Stone's weathered face appeared on the screen. "Morning, Jake," Rita said with a grin. "Sorry to disturb your breakfast, but we just received some interesting news from our scouts near the Imperial border. It seems Admiral Kreshavon has been stripped of his rank and exiled for his failure here. The Catherian High Command is apparently having serious discussions about changing their expansion policies." "Good," Jake said simply. "There's more. 3 more systems declared independence last week, and 2 others are requesting alliance protection. Whatever you started here is spreading faster than anyone expected." After the transmission ended, the 3 of them finished breakfast in comfortable silence. Jake reflected on how much his life had changed since that morning when he first saw Catherian ships landing in the colony square. Back then, he had been a simple man with simple goals. Now he found himself at the center of a galactic revolution that was reshaping the balance of power across dozens of worlds. But the most important changes were much more personal. Jake looked across the table at Lisa, who was reading reports from her students on their latest cultural exchange projects. Then he glanced at Zextar, who was carefully cleaning the breakfast dishes with the methodical precision that characterized everything he did. A year ago, Jake would never have imagined that his family would include a former alien warrior. He would never have believed that love could grow in such unexpected directions, or that enemies could become closer than blood relatives. Most of all, he would never have thought that one desperate fight in a dusty colony square could lead to so much positive change. "I should head to the mining site," Jake announced as he finished his coffee. "The new Centauri workers start today, and I want to make sure they understand our safety procedures." "I will accompany you," Zextar said immediately. "Some of the equipment requires four-armed operation, and I am the only one on the planet who can handle those tasks safely." Lisa smiled at both of them. "And I have a classroom full of young beings from 6 different species who are eager to learn about human literature. Try not to start any more galactic revolutions while I'm teaching." As Jake walked toward the door, he paused to look back at the kitchen where it had all led. 6 months ago, Zextar had been his enemy and the greatest threat to everything he loved. Now that same alien was cooking breakfast and planning to spend the day helping with mining operations. The former Imperial commander had found something on New Haven that the Catherian Empire had never been able to offer him. He had found a home. Jake stepped outside into the bright morning air and headed toward another day of ordinary work in an extraordinary place. Behind him in the kitchen, Zextar was already planning lunch and discussing dinner possibilities with Lisa. The alien who had once believed that might makes right was now learning that sometimes the greatest victories come from the simple act of taking care of the people you love.